All right, we are live and at the Fastlane Summit. So, welcome everyone to the Fastlane Summit, the digital e-mobility event where any minute counts. A first edition hosted by Valens, a rapidly growing electric vehicle charging company. We know that this was a challenging year for the mobility industry. And it's time to build and rebuild momentum and shine a light on the human side of our industry while sharing insights and inspiration today. So I am your co-host, Hugo Pereira, a former mobility executive and now a growth strategist and leadership advocate. Part-time, I also do this kind of hosting gigs, and I'm joined by an amazing co-host, Marco. Welcome.
Thank you, Hugo, for that nice introduction. And hello, everyone, from my side as well. So I'm Marco, I'm Agile Coach at Vaylens. But let's not talk about too much from us. We have an amazing agenda for today and really cool guests, which we are really happy to talk with today. So I would say let's get that thing here kicked off.
Yeah, that's cool. So maybe to get started, Marco, before so that the audience can get to know each other a little bit. I know that someone told me this morning that you came to the office of Valens really fast. So was it in a full power of an EV acceleration? How did you arrive to the office so fast?
Should I tell you the truth here, Hugo? It's not an EV car; it's a combustion engine. Maybe I can tell you guys that I'm not very convinced of EV charging today. Hopefully, I get not the negative feedback now in the chat here, which you can use, of course, for feedback. But in general, it's maybe not the time for me to buy an EV. But maybe you guys can convince me today. Let's see.
Mm-hmm. Well, for a fun fact, I also don't own a car, but I live in Amsterdam. So, we all ride a bicycle, but I ride an electric bike. So maybe there's some component to mobility there. And as you're going to start introducing the agenda, maybe just share on the chat, where are you coming from, which country or city, and if you own an EV, which one, and if not, which one is your favorite. So let's just use a little bit of the chat. And while we do that, let me talk a little bit about today's agenda. And we should be able to see the screen. So Marco, can you just make sure that everyone can see my screen? Can you just confirm that technically you can see it?
So at least I can see it, and feel free to give us some likes here, and they are already flying in. So let's talk about the agenda.
Fantastic. So today, what's going to happen? We're going to kick off in a few moments already with the first keynote by Ryan Fisher, the head of charging infrastructure at Bloomberg New Energy Finance, all about the trends that are shaping mobility in 2025. Following that, we're going to have a panel discussion in an interesting format on the future of EV charging with Philipp Graf, head of marketing and sales at Valens, and Hahn, the CEO of Hubject. Then you're going to have an intermission, a break, a short 15-minute break for everyone to refresh themselves, get their coffee, and then back on track at the Fastlane Summit with a candid panel conversation. The screw-ups, the learnings of the mobility industry directly from leaders like Kristof Vereenooghe, Joerg Lohr, and Marcus Fendt, the CEOs of Bnewable, Valens, and Mobility House, respectively. And then after all those learnings, we're going to end up in a massive inspiration, going around the world in 30 minutes in an EV, a conversation with Lexi Alford, an adventurer known as Lexi Limitless. So a lot on our plate for today, and a lot of exciting speakers. So Ryan, if you can join the stage, that would be fantastic. There you go. Here we have Ryan. Ryan, you lead the coverage of charging infrastructure market, and I know that you are here to share the trends shaping mobility in 2025. So we are very excited to have you here. Thanks for joining us. Maybe before we start immediately the presentation, maybe you want to quickly introduce yourself in a short 30 seconds for the audience.
Yeah, sure. Thank you, Hugo, and thanks, Marco. I'm Ryan Fisher. I'm based in the London office for Bloomberg, and you can sort of see the space lighting behind me. I'm going to do a presentation for about 25 minutes, half an hour, a bit on the EV market, and then going into charging infrastructure as well. At BNEF, we cover many sectors, and we're trying to kind of bring those together and give the insights, because a lot of those are crossing more so than they have done in maybe the last decades. whether that be biofuels, which people maybe don't realize interfaces as much, or it could be the grid sector and the electricity industry interfacing with automakers. So yeah, I'm going to give some insights today, and thank you for having me.
Great. And with that, I believe we're going to share the presentation right away. And for the audience that is here, feel free to use the chat to ask questions. We're going to pick up some of those questions. There's a tab called questions on the bottom. You can ask a new question. Please use that because it makes it easier. And let's use the chat more for a general conversation amongst everyone. So Ryan, I will share my screen and so that you can have the presentation ready. And, we'll see you in about 20, 25 minutes as you share all these insights.
Yeah, thank you. And as we go through the presentation, there's quite a few graphs. So bear with me. See if you put the questions in, I'll see if I can have a look as I move through the sections and can answer them then or at the end. So the first section is on EV sales. Obviously, in the media at the moment, we're hearing a lot about it being a crisis and particularly the lobbying. So I'm just going to take you through where they actually are when we look at the numbers and how I'm interpreting those numbers, or BNEF is interpreting those numbers, because you can see it in many different ways. So 2023, a record year, nearly 14 million sales, and it gives you a good perspective when you look back at this chart over time to go, okay, wow, really almost quadrupling in the industry just from 2020. This year looks like there's still going to be growth on a global basis, but then there's some regional trends. So what you sort of see in the next chart is the plateauing of Europe, as opposed to some of the other markets. So you've got China growing incredibly fast. I was in China a few months ago, and it is amazing when you're out on the road. So Shenzhen, for example, you're sort of seeing the other automaker brands, the Mercedes, the Audis. They look old. You can't put it in a chart, but they just look a little bit different. And those Chinese automakers really making some quality vehicles. Beijing, not quite the same. And there's definitely different trends on the policies over there, whether that be the license plates, lotteries, or the number of automakers in the specific region. But you do get a sense that people are still worried about the range. Like, it isn't, oh, you just go there and nobody's bothered about the things that we hear in the US and Europe. There certainly is a similar type of trend. You see, obviously, North America, people talking a lot about the Trump administration coming in, and we've done a little bit of analysis on that, where we think that EV sales obviously could go down if he repeals things like the IRA or fuel economy standards. But if you look at the current sales, what we're really seeing is like non-Tesla sales for the first time overtaking Tesla sales in that market. So a different dynamic and new players coming in. And then obviously the Europe line doesn't look particularly great and hasn't done for a while, really. But you have to be aware of some of the factors that come into that. So the next slide is basically showing you Germany with 20% of sales at the bottom, and then everybody else slightly higher. So you've got up to 60% in Sweden. I'm not going to talk too much about Norway because I think everybody knows about that. But some of the big hitters this year, Belgium has done very well, 43%. The Netherlands, 48%, for example. So lots of different countries here, still hitting quite large numbers. The UK, I think, was about 35% in the latest month. So not everything to be negative about. And then the slide after this is sort of talking to some of those different markets that we've got. A little bit conscious that the slides that I'm showing were not the ones that I thought were coming up, which is just giving me a little question mark. So these ones are year-on-year sales that you're seeing basically one quarter this year to the previous year. And you see some markets growing and then other markets not so much, which I suppose is a worry if you're in the market and you're an automaker, but it's not the worst thing when you balance it out on a wider market. So hopefully the next slide is then the second quarter, which is even slightly worse. So you're getting a kind of change. And then the one after this is Germany. So the German car market is a big part of Europe. It's surprising when you look at this, the 61% down, but actually those summer months, for example, are always quite bad. The reason in Germany is they got rid of the incentives, and that therefore made the market go down. But if you look at the kind of first 3 quarters of the year, we're about 1% up, or -1%, sorry, with Germany and Europe and including the UK in that. But if we get rid of Germany, about 4% up. So it's not a catastrophe, even though some of those lines that I showed on share of sales don't look great. Actually, the European story is not too bad. And interestingly, I was just chatting with somebody in the team here, and they're describing that Germany actually in November is 4% higher year on year than it was in 2023. So although they've taken some of those subsidies out, there is still signs of growth, and obviously automakers are discounting some of those cars. We can move to the next slide. Not every automaker is the same, and you can see on here like Geely at the top of the list compared to Toyota at the bottom. Now, each one of these will have different reasons for being where they are, but they're being pushed by fuel economy legislation and legislation in the UK, like the ZEV mandate, to grow. A lot of these are pushing back against it. However, it does show you a reasonably positive story, and I think you're getting a bit of a flip-flopping of what some of these companies are saying to policymakers and in the media. So maybe they are reasonably happy with their position. If you look at BMW here, they're sort of reasonably well on track to meet some of these legislations, but you wouldn't necessarily think that if you see what they're saying in the media about hydrogen cars and some of the other policies that they're talking about. So when we think about the automakers, you've had quite a lot of negative sentiment about where their targets are and how they're going to reduce them in terms of EV sales. And what this is showing you is what we tracked depending on the year. So the 2025 targets in 2020 or in 2021, what we're seeing was actually they were over time going up. And then the last little bit of time, you've obviously heard a lot of these companies going down. But some of the reality is that they're only going down a minimal amount. So if you look at the 2030 target in the red line versus the kind of yellow one, very similar in trajectory to what it was before. Obviously 3.3 million units is not anything to be laughed about. It's still, from a business perspective, matters. However, it's not the doom and gloom that might be portrayed when you look at some of these scale backs. Here you're seeing the fuel economy targets coming in. There does seem to be some traction, I think, with the lobby group, so it shouldn't be dismissed as nothing that these automakers are coming out and being worried about the fines. We're writing more details about who is being fined and how that's going to change, but you can see the second headline. This is like billions. This is a big deal for these automakers in how they meet some of these targets. I'm optimistic, and the next slide kind of shows you some of the vehicles prices. Obviously China is very, very cheap, and then you've seen in Europe and the US very high. So you see the BEV prices superseding the combustion targets in the US on the left-hand side here. Now, if you move to Europe, which is kind of the next slide, you start to see there's this a huge gap between the ICE vehicles and the BEV vehicles, and it doesn't account for what we're seeing in battery prices at the moment. So they do have some room to discount it, and it becomes a bit of a question mark of what is acceptable in terms of the discounting and the profit rates, margins that they want to make. But also their argument and their lobbying is obviously saying, oh, we've discounted loads, we've lost 6 billion in discounting. Well, where was the price of the car to start, and was that reasonable? So I think we'll see some of these prices get closer together, and that's how they'll start to shift more of these vehicles over time. And obviously the good thing for Europe is that cheaper cars are coming, and there's obviously some reality that they've pitched these cars for 2025, 2026 to account for the fuel economy legislation. So you see like there, the Skoda Epic, if you look that one up, it's a nice car, you can expect it to shift a fair amount of units. So I'm going to move on now to just the EV charging section. I think I might take a pause and we might just take some questions so I can just resend this deck, because for some reason it's a slightly different version to what I had. So I apologize. And let's see if we can just do that.
Yeah, so making a quick pause. Questions on the first set of data that Ryan shared. And I know that there is some questions here. I see on the chat some conversations, but we have here, 85 people online. I am sure there is quite important and quite insightful questions that come. Maybe to get started on my end, which is, the price parity keeps on delaying year on year. What's your perception of, is that gap coming faster because of the pressure that comes from the EU, or you think there is also like some strategy from automotives that will help them bring more and, more models to the market and also slash the prices of the ones that are already in place?
There we go. I think if we had this intermission before, it would be in the UK like a Mr. Blobby with the different colours on the screen. So I apologise for everybody online. But I've sent you the new deck. I'm sorry if I missed a question from you there, Hugh, as well. I see the one here. What do we see happening with China with range extended PHEVs? Yeah, we've done some work on that, and they're certainly becoming pretty popular. These vehicles with maybe 50, 60 kilowatt hours batteries as well as an engine. I mean, in the US, we've looked at even the pickups. Now they're pretty expensive, the pickups that are coming out, and that they start to get pretty huge as well as a vehicle. But yeah, I think we're reasonably positive on the PHEVs, and obviously the kind of makeup of those vehicles is also interesting in that we have sort of the inline, the parallel, where the battery is the main driver, and then when that runs out, the engine starts running, but it's feeding the battery, and that always goes onto the powertrain. So that configuration maybe is going to happen a little bit more over time.
All right. We can continue with the
brilliant. Sorry, technical issues.
So it's all part of the game.
Brilliant. Okay, so we've got two sections here. One is on EV charging as the public charging market as a whole. And then the second one is diving a little bit deeper into the impact on the energy system. And these are slides that hopefully start to answer your key questions, and then we can discuss it in more detail afterwards. So again, when you're seeing the headlines, and particularly if you think about the automaker lobby, what is they're describing a market where there's no EV chargers going in and there isn't enough. And certainly you can take a picture of some of the service stations being full of chargers, and there are issues such as the range of these vehicles, particularly in cold weather, and the derating of the charging infrastructure. Maybe that's because the battery isn't warm enough, or maybe the station is sharing the charge rate. However, when you actually kind of dig into the numbers of chargers being installed, the density is getting better. So the first one is all chargers, and then the second one is basically these ultra fast chargers. What we're seeing really on an investment perspective is maybe 80-90% of the public investment is going into the ultra fast chargers, depending on where you are. And there's a huge drop. So I mean, both the black line, which is the UK, and the pink line are pretty extraordinary in the last couple of years. And that's being felt a little bit by the companies in the sector who maybe in their business plan said they were going to serve so much electricity and then are serving a little bit less, but certainly driving down 300 BEVs per ultra fast charger to less than 100 in most markets now. Obviously this discussion about EVs per connector is also a little bit arbitrary, and the EU is talking about this kilowatt per BEV, and I think it's about 1.2. So every country in Europe pretty much is superseding the AFIR targets already, but you do get a perspective here of the real big leaders. You see China on almost 8 kilowatt hours per BEV, and the Netherlands, which has got loads of slow rollout. So a different way to think about it if you're maybe not so familiar with these targets. What you'll see next is really the difference if you are out and about driving, and how I'm kind of trying to give the perspective of the average driver. So maybe 4 years ago, you couldn't find any of these chargers that existed, whereas now there's over 100,000 of these in Europe. Many different reasons why. Some of that is the companies coming into the market, some of it is the policy. But these stations are not just like one or two chargers scattered. A lot of these now are like hubs of 4 to 6 or more chargers, which is good for reliability. When you move on to the next slide, we'll see the competition and how that varies. So in the US and Europe, Tesla is the top, and you kind of get an idea of just how many chargers they put in. They're putting more emphasis on the US for sure. And then you've got the next 5 biggest operators, which is this purple line. And you can see just about 20% of what Tesla's put in the US, but they're about equal to Tesla in Europe. Now the next line, which is the gray one, gives you a big idea of the number of companies and the influence of them in Europe. So they've been exponentially growing over the past couple of years, and they're more important in terms of size than Tesla or all these other big 5 companies, whereas they don't really exist in the US. I think what's likely to happen is that the US is going to jump. We've started to see that already. We've been tracking the NEVI grant, which is kind of this 7.5 billion funding that they've got, and there's almost 100 companies I think now we're tracking that have come in to the market to try and win that. The thing about Europe as opposed to the US is the US money is quite heavily flowing to companies on major roads, for example, who've already got stations, whereas in Europe you do have a chance of winning it without necessarily already having a site or already being in the market for fuel retail. Now, when you think about all of the different sectors that are coming in, there's a different share of these or makeup in each region. So in Europe, it's actually quite split. So you've got utilities and automakers still playing a pretty big role, but the automaker bucket is maybe a bit more spread than just being Tesla, because you've got the likes of Ionity. And then oil majors 14%. So you can't say that they're nothing, but they're not the biggest in the market. Certainly, if you're thinking about their prospects, it's worrying, because we've done, this is from a report on fuel retailers, you're seeing oil demand declining in Europe, the US, and China basically already. And with that, they're also going to have EV charging coming in, where maybe 50% of the demand goes to home chargers, and they're only 14% of the market. So I think whereas everybody sort of knows what I've just said, it's not hit people that much yet. And when you look at like China, 1% oil and gas majors, they're going to start to feel that pinch sooner because of the share of EVs that we showed on the other slide. So this next year, I think we'll start to feel and see some of those changes in kind of sectors that maybe have so far been resistant to it. Maybe there's going to be some more M&A, but there might be also some financial results that start to make people wary. And then obviously, again, the US mainly just Tesla dominated, so many more companies starting to come in to take advantage of that market. This has maybe dumbed down the reality though. So in this fuel retail report, what we also looked at was the announcements, and we tried to give a perspective and talk about things like the advantages and disadvantages of each of these companies or sectors coming in. And we're reasonably optimistic really on the supermarkets, for example, whereby today they're delivering twice the fuel per station than many of the independent stations, just because they've got that convenience attached to them. You're already going to the supermarket, maybe it takes 40 minutes. That 40 minutes links quite well. And you see Lidl, for example, is not involved in fuel retail, but has jumped into this market. And they're already buying large amounts of energy. So very competitive. It doesn't mean the oil majors are not interested and they've got the largest targets. Slightly confusing set of charts, and the axes are not all the same. But the oil majors are not there yet. That is for sure. Just have a quick look at the chat. Growth in Europe expected. What part would you say is driven by regulatory incentives versus consumer perspective? I think there's a mix, and I think the marketing could be slightly better, or is going to improve over the next portion of time to work on that TCO point that's mentioned here. So you've got the second-hand market, and that's actually where most people are probably buying cars today. And what I think you might see in the next 5 years is a replacement of people buying a second-hand car with then going out and buying a new EV, because it can be cheaper when you combine some of these TCO elements. I think today it can be driven by incentives. So I was pretty shocked actually that obviously Germany, whilst it's got rid of the incentives, we've seen those really bad numbers. The October number being ahead of the year before is quite impressive. The incentives can be quite focused on company cars. So I was speaking to a friend before this as well, and he was saying he's got a PHEV, I think a Tiguan coming, and it was £36 a month to do that because of how the UK sets up company car tax. So there's some question marks personally from me as to how is the regulatory environment set up to really help people to choose the path that is maybe not correct, but the most emission or least emission intensive. Because it's not quite there yet, and we're seeing some backlash as well, where taxes are starting to rise in different regions for EVs, whereas before they were kind of written off. So there's obviously some positive bits in the company car market. What you would say is great, but is that actually incentivizing all of the right users to go EV? Because I do hear a lot of people say, well, I got the £38 a month EV, but I drive 400 miles a day and I can't sit on a motorway waiting for an hour to charge. And then that ends up in the news, and then it gives the wrong sentiment. So is it that they're putting incentives to not necessarily all the right people? I do question. Okay, so the next section is on pricing, utilization, and then a little bit on the future. So we now have time series of pricing, and we can do that across the world. What I'm showing here is Europe, and you sort of see that in public, the ultra fast charging is more expensive than the slow charging, basically, when you look at it on average. It's not the same across every region. What's interesting when you look at this dynamic in China, for example, is that actually the fast charging is by and large cheaper than the slow charging. And I think that's a little bit to do with parking fees, and also a little bit to do with the economics of they've got so many cars coming in and out of those stations, then you can suddenly flatten the per kilowatt hour rate as well. And I think that might start to be seen as these two close, maybe in Europe and the US. The next one is then giving you an idea of how these are changing. Probably shouldn't have put so many lines on the chart, but if we focus in on the black line, which is the UK, and the green line, which is Norway, what you're sort of seeing, I think, in Norway is there's more competition in the market, and this is leading to prices starting to decline as those companies fight for market share. In the UK, it's not 100% clear why it's rising so high. One of the factors that is playing is grid fees. So within your electricity costs, you have to pay for using the distribution network and the transmission network. And they changed in the UK how you pay for that. And that means that the fees have gone up. And I think on some sites, this can be like tens, hundreds of thousands a year. And that means that the CPOs are trying to recover their costs. I think part of it is also that prices being high is advantageous if you're trying to say to investors that your business model is working. And I don't think everybody in this market is as price sensitive at the moment, because they're probably getting cheap energy at home. There are some other slides that show that in a second. When you compare to gasoline, you get an idea here that it is not necessarily cheaper. And this is starting to flow through to negative sentiment in the market as well, particularly if you're a ride-share driver who maybe is using the public fast more. So what we see on the UK is like it can be about 2 times more expensive to use the fast charging. In France, where obviously they have a lot of nuclear energy is arguably cheaper, the public fast charging is cheaper. So these dynamics also weighing on EV adoption. When you see all the companies on the chart, these are quite close together, but it does give you an idea that there can be differences, and then what they're doing is like pushing people towards maybe special offers that drive them to their network to be just their customer on an ongoing basis. What we're doing here is just analyzing the ad hoc pricing, because it becomes quite difficult if you advertise every sub-layer of pricing that's available from these companies. And here's a basic summary of those ratios when you look at different countries across the world. And as I said, China is basically cheaper whatever charging that you have. So it makes it a very easy advertising when you say BEV is cheaper. You're buying in China a cheap vehicle, as we showed at the beginning, and wherever you charge is going to be cheaper. So these dynamics also playing in. And then you've got other markets where it's more. Now, some things that flow into this from, say, a US perspective is we're probably using a gasoline efficiency here that is more related to Europe than the US. However, you can argue when people do the calculations in the US, they probably do compare the EV to the Toyota Prius rather than their massive SUV or pickup truck that they've got. And then when you look at, say, the difference between the different rates on the next slide, depending on where you charge, this is a UK perspective, but it obviously plays out in some of the other markets. Big premium fast charging, basic home charging is usually quite a lot cheaper. The dedicated EV tariffs, thousands of pounds cheaper. And this comes back to the price sensitivity I was describing. If you're already doing 80% of your charging on that 9 cents per kilowatt hour, then you're probably not too price sensitive to the expensive fast charging. If you're all fast charging, then you're going to be more bothered about it. So different dynamics in different regions. The thing about the 1,200, and that is similar in other markets in Europe, is that that is actually a bigger saving than you would ever make in China, for example, even though they've got cheap electricity at homes as well. They've also got very cheap gasoline, so the differential isn't as big. So there is some benefits in regions like Europe and the US to be had on these rates, and I think we'll start seeing that flow through in the next 5 years to people really considering, is an EV better for me because it's cheaper? When I consider some of these dynamics that they maybe don't quite understand at the moment. These networks are not all the same, and I think we're starting to see that in the results. Here you've got European networks, and it's a high-level view, but it does give you an idea. So Fastned 92% growth, Allego and Recharge just 24%. So Fastned's growth here is bigger than the other companies, and it's higher than the fleet growth that you've seen in many of the markets. So 92% versus maybe 40% growth in the fleet, whereas Allego and Recharge slightly down. So some of that is competition, some of it is strategy, being on maybe the better roads or being more attractive to consumers. And obviously, you see the surveys, and you can see sometimes there's networks at the top and they're really good and reliable, and other networks at the bottom, and I think some of that's playing out. This also really demonstrates or reflects what we've seen on competition in the US, which is that there isn't much, and what that's led is a huge jump in the amount of energy being distributed from the networks over time. And then some of these companies, then you've seen their share prices rise, and you've started to see some more confidence, I think, in what they're doing. Now, the investors are a bit worried because there is a lot of companies coming into the market. So not all investors and not all markets, but we think about Europe specifically. However, it's not going to last forever, and maybe we'll see some consolidation, but the market is still going to grow. So if you believe our forecast, what we see over time is that we've got obviously almost a doubling of the fleet in the last couple of years in Europe. And then what we'll see by 2030 is that this will also almost quadruple in the next couple of years, by 2030, about 40 million. So a big growth in the fleet, and obviously that means the demand that these chargers will grow. You could also argue that it isn't as simple as a multiplication in the fleet and using that number straight to the charging demand, because more of these people might not have home chargers as well. So I was kind of briefly describing the companies and how they're differing on strategy, and this plays out when you sort of look at some of their gross margins as well. So Fastned's gross margin almost 80%, and maybe not surprising when you think about where they're positioning these and how much you would typically pay for petrol, maybe on the key sites. And then you've got the likes of Allego and EVgo not doing as well, but certainly starting to see some good numbers. We have seen other companies discuss the financial performance. So BP saying EBITDA positive on some of their, I think, Chinese and German networks, for example. And that's obviously encouraging for other investors, but it may not always stay the same, because people may choose to go to one station in 1 year, and then it may not be as competitive the next year because other stations with either cheaper pricing or better locations or convenience have been built out. Some of the other considerations I'll just go through. So the first one here is power purchase agreements. We've seen more of them, and actually Fastned just signed another one yesterday, which isn't reflected on here. This is a little bit of a hedge on electricity, and really the main point of this slide is to say how you buy electricity, how you trade it will matter across all of these company strategies, whether that be for public charging, maybe it's going to be for home charging. There's a big play on flexibility, buying energy, and how you trade it. And what you'll see after this is that it moves on. If you can have low emission electricity, you can also get more carbon credits. Nobody really knows how these systems work, and we've done a lot of detail on the different markets. So California is the most famous one. This is the low carbon fuel standard. And what's happening is if you put fuels on the market that are above a certain emission, then you will generate deficits. If you're below, you generate credits. And it's pretty basic, and they trade around $100 per ton, and that's been going lower. Similar problems in other markets that have these. So Germany has one, the Netherlands has one, and Europe in the Renewable Energy Directive is saying that these should be rolled out in every country by 2025. Now, whether they actually do is difficult to say, and I think countries are probably not quite up to speed with rolling these out quick enough. But where they have been rolled out, they're very effective. So this one is worth around 5 billion a year, can account for about 10% of credits, 10% of revenues for some of these charging companies. When you think about other bits of the market, it can also influence it as well, but the schemes don't always work the same. So in California, they have something called capacity credits, and what they do is they provide a baseline amount of credits even if your charger isn't delivering any energy, because at the beginning, that's when you actually want the money. So there is lessons to be learned when other countries in Europe, for example, are going to roll out these schemes. Another difference you see in Germany, they're providing funds directly to the EV owner, whereas in California, they're providing them to the automaker and the utility to then fund the market. So subtle differences, lots of money that can come into the market, and big changes being made basically because there's been an excess of generation of credits going to places like biofuels. So they're trying to change the rules of how these work. Now, this one I think is going to be important. We've seen automakers jump in, utilities jump in to the market, and obviously we talk about oil and gas majors as well. Some of the reality is most fuel retailers today are not making a huge amount of money on selling the fuel. So you see two examples here. You see the fuel is about 75% of sales, but just 50% of profit. So what they're actually trying to do is drive people to the merchandise sales. So the partnerships, I think, are going to matter, and whether you have an actual network is going to matter over time as well.
So Ryan, quick interruption, around 3 minutes left.
Yeah, cool. I'll do 2 more slides and then we'll go with questions. I'll do 3 more. So power and utilization. So we do an outlook for the size of the market, and this talks to a station today may be earning a lot of money, but in future perhaps there'll be competition. Rising to about 120,000 chargers in Europe. Now, we see that you sort of end up with average utilization quite high within our outlook, and average power about 195 kilowatt. But there's a big variance in the size of the network depending on what you believe to be true within these two figures. So if you're an optimist, then the network, optimist on technology, maybe the network's going to be much smaller and fast charging will increase. If you're not, then you can have a different size network, maybe much larger. So big variability in what's going to happen depending on how technology changes, which adds the risk to the sector. And then what you see, just based on the fast charging market as a whole, which is the next slide, is that the DC market we're not expecting to grow a lot. So China is already producing maybe 450,000 DC chargers a year, and we don't think that their market is going to continue to grow much or at all over the next few years, and therefore a lot of those suppliers are looking to obviously sell out into other regions, whereas we do see a big growth in the AC market. Okay, we're going to skip the last section because I've been a bit slow, and I'm just going to point to the last slide before it says thank you, if that's okay, which is number 43. Yeah, here we go. So we've done a lot of analysis on V2G, and what you broadly see is that it does, when it's scaled up, it could replace gas and significantly lower emissions. The size of a V2G fleet would significantly outnumber what we're saying is going to happen on stationary storage, for example, and it kind of cannibalizes that market. The difficulty becomes, where is the kind of sweet spot of the size of the market? Because with a small percentage of vehicles, you can make quite a big difference to the energy market, and you can saturate revenues pretty quickly. So we've done some analysis in the UK, looking at, say, 10% of the fleet being V2G versus, say, 30-40%. And at 30-40% as a market, you're making very similar revenues to what you're making before that. And that therefore leads to a number, we don't know what the number exactly is, but closer to 10% of the fleet being V2G could saturate the market than, say, 50%. It starts to look like that could be economically challenging. But obviously not everybody's going to do V2G. So the last slide was basically showing Renault's trial, just to, rather than use all my charts to make those points, which is showing there's 500 of these cars being bidirectionally put into a pilot, I think it is, as a fleet for ride sharing in Utrecht. And this statement in the press release says it will provide 10% of the needed flexibility for the Utrecht region. Now, I'd think this is, depending on if they're using the city or they're using the whole region, it could be 300,000 people or 1.5 million people. But what it's showing you is a very small number of cars can make a massive difference to the needs in the market, and therefore could change how attractive V2G can be. So I'll leave it there, and if we've got any more time, then I'm happy to answer questions.
Great. Thank you, Ryan, for that insights. A lot of data here. Let's jump through the chat and the questions area here. So I see one YouTube link from Hugh. I didn't have a look so far, but maybe it's an interesting one. Feel free to check it afterwards. And then again, Hugh, is that correct? On slide 21, the gasoline is 2/3 of the price in the UK that it is in Germany or France. I don't know if you have that directly in the head.
Yeah, there's the slide that we had. It's obviously twice as much for fast charge, about £1 per kilowatt hour at the moment, and many networks maybe a bit cheaper. So an easy sum for your average Joe to make to figure out they're going to be paying more when they turn up. And yeah, New York, I think, was another example of that happening. Germany is more expensive.
Okay, so then we have a feedback. Good to be part of that webinar. So really cool. Thanks a lot. And of course, that kudos go out to you, Ryan, as well. And then another question: are those revenue forecasts for V2G based on kilowatt hour pricing or on capacity pricing?
So we do a few things. We're almost assuming that the flexibility markets are too small to be valuable. So most of the market value we're saying is basically arbitrage. And then the second side we're saying is system cost reductions. So if you can get rid of gas, you're getting rid of the actual physical commodity as well as the cost to start and stop the systems, etc. So we add that into like a system cost bit. What we found though, and this isn't the case everywhere, but we just talk about this UK analysis, is that you increasing the peak by absorbing so much solar. So all of that solar and wind that is currently curtailed, for example, may go over the peak capacity of the grid network. So we haven't managed to show this in a perfect way, but if you go over the peak capacity of the grid network, arguably you need to build more grid. So when we're saying you're making this much money, are you sort of robbing Peter to pay Paul? Like we're giving somebody money to have their V2G, but now we're going to have to spend billions upgrading the grid to pipe more energy through. And that becomes difficult to model because some of those things can be resolved because maybe they're going to happen on a local level.
Okay, thanks. Maybe Hugo, let's pick from our side the most relevant question. That's maybe you can pick one or two as joker here because we are ending the time box here.
Yeah, we're ending up with the final two questions, and of course more can be probably shared afterwards, but there is an interesting question with people at voting, which is, well, there's obviously growth expected from 2025 onwards for the European EV market. But Ryan, the question is, what part would you say is driven by still the incentives, the regulatory incentives versus the consumer perspective, a better price, quality, and TCO? And when do you expect the later to happen, the consumer perspective to take over just the incentives?
Yes, I think we're already starting to see it, and that Germany number that I talked about is part of it. From a personal perspective, I do think that if the company car taxation is reduced in regions like the UK, however, what they're doing in many of the cases is they're staggering the reduction. So if benefit in kind tax is maybe 17% for an ICE and then it's 1% for an EV, they're then making it 2% in the following year, then 3%, then 4%, which is a much more market-friendly method to reducing the subsidies rather than like in Germany where they just said, tomorrow we're going to get rid of however many euros, 5,000 euros per BEV that you can have available. So I think it's going to flip from one side to the other, particularly with cheaper EVs coming. Okay.
One last question, and then we'll have to move to the other panel discussion. But a last one is from Gianpaolo, where he shares that Luca De Meo, the CEO of Renault Group, highlighted the need for more small EVs. I think you mentioned a little bit on the presentation that more EVs, cheaper EVs are coming because they have 75% lower carbon footprint and also competing with Chinese brands. So how do you anticipate the growing focus on small EVs to expand the market and keep the price accessible, and that hopefully advances electric mobility?
So there was 2 posts on my LinkedIn feed the other day, and one of them was showing that EVs were coming at cheap prices, and the second one was showing that the current EV euros to 25,000 euros. So arguably some of those prices that we've shown are already available because some of the EVs on the market are there. So that gives me maybe some pessimism that they're going to sell. Some of the optimism is you can find leases in the UK $160 per month, for example, for a Nissan Leaf or a I don't know, the Honda Prologue. Low mileage, maybe 5,000 miles a year, but I think people will start to realize that it's cheaper, and I kind of reflected that point. From a policy perspective, there doesn't appear to be a great focus, whether it be EVs or heat pumps or any of these technologies, on really making it obvious or even intentional from a policymaker's perspective to make the fossil fuel intentionally more expensive than the electricity. And in many cases, that is kind of becoming problematic. And we've seen it. I mean, in the UK, they kept the petrol tax exemptions on after the new government came in. So a hard balance for policymakers.
Yeah. Thanks. Ryan, it was a pleasure having you here, kicking off the Fast Lane Summit. Independently of any technical challenges, we still made it happen. Like always, like the industry, always moving forward. And if people want to reach out to you and to engage in the conversation, what's the best way forward?
Yeah, sure. I'll put my email in the chat, and feel free to email me. And yeah, thank you for your time, and apologies with the technical issues at the beginning.
That's the way that's the way we move. Thanks again, and Ryan, it was a pleasure to have you.
Thank you so much, Hugo. Thank you, Marco.
Thank
you,
Ryan.
Marco, what do we have next for this audience?
Yeah, I'm still, let's say, a little bit thrilled by all the data we have just seen. So really great kickoff of this session here. And like the feedback that we had already in the chat, I'm also very happy to be here. And hopefully, Christian and Philipp have the same feeling so far. So hi, guys. Nice to meet you. Christian, we had the chance to shake hands at the ICNC this year, so thanks a lot again for this beautiful event. Maybe you, and then afterwards, Philipp, can quickly introduce yourself.
I'm very happy to do so, Marco. Yeah, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Christian Hahn, having the pleasure of leading a company called Hubject. As Hubject, we're operating a B2B marketplace, focusing on services like roaming and plug and charge. And yeah, we're happy to be part of this great event today. Thank you.
Great. Philipp.
And I'm Philipp Graf. Nice to meet all of you guys today and to share thoughts on the future of eMobility. So I'm responsible for sales and marketing at vaylens, and this includes, by the way, also the team who has been creating this event and who is running it right now. So first of all, a special thank you to everyone involved, to you guys, Marco and Hugo, and also to Rena and Barb listening in.
Definitely kudos to the colleagues here who were really highly involved in preparation in the background, of course. We are only taking the plans here and positioning them, but there's a lot of effort going on in the background, definitely. So having a look now into the, what is it called, the future of the EV charging experience. So from the user experience side, maybe. And Hugo, what's the mode? Did we prepare for, Christian and Phil?
Yeah. So Christian decided he ran away from the first question. So that's what happened. Christian decided to just run away from the first question. While he returns, I'm sure, and joins the stage, to explain the format to the audience. This is not going to be an open conversation. The way it's going to happen is that we're going to explain a specific, let's call it thought-provoking statement. As a moderator, we ask one of the panelists. So let's say we're going to start with Philipp asking a provoking statement. He provides his view on a statement. And after the initial answer, then the other panelist can, come in, complement, agree to the statement and build up on it, or he can debate back and challenge back. We're just saying, Christian, that you just run away from the first question, but that's okay. So I just explained the concept. And for the audience, the first 4 or 5 statements we're gonna guide the audience and guide the speakers through it and the panelists, Philipp and Christian. And afterwards, feel free to put on the chat your thought-provoking either or statement, and then just see what the audience takes. So to get started, without further ado, Philipp, you're going to get the first statement, and then Christian, feel free to rebate or challenge or build on top of it, because you might agree, of course. So the first question or first statement is, Philipp, should EV charging networks prioritize software flexibility over hardware compatibility?
Yeah. So you're asking the right one on this. Now, but I think to answer this question, it's good to take a look at different elements of the EV charging market and maybe also how it has developed over time. I think it's almost fair to say 10 years ago, the market hasn't even been existing to a large degree, or was a fraction of what we see today. That evolvement, you can see, I remember early discussions about the necessity for a connected charger in the early days. So I had discussions with OEMs at that time asking, hey, why would your charger need to be connected to the cloud at all? So I think luckily we are way beyond that point in the meantime, and we know there's an energy ecosystem, there's a mobility ecosystem, and also at least a payment ecosystem. And they are connected to each other, and they are connected by a lot of software to each other. So that's one element. Then the use cases also have, let's say, diverged into more complex or more different use cases, where initially I feel there was a need for, hey, let's have one solution which fits anything. And today we see there's a lot of variety, there's a high variety of products or solutions for these different use cases in place. So that's one thing. On the other side, second element, maybe on the hardware evolvement, I'm always impressed if I'm at Power to Drive, for example, or at ICNC, seeing the growth on the hardware charging station side. So there's a huge development in the past 10 years. Also, we see much more quality today than in the early days, more protocols being adapted and more standards being adapted. And that's a very positive thing, because it ultimately means that the players in the e-mobility market have the freedom to detach the hardware and the software decision from each other and work with the specialists in each domain. Is software becoming more central for CPOs and for other players in the market? I do believe yes. And I also believe this is going to move on further with the market development. And while we will see hardwares being replaced, also if you think about topics like bidirectional charging, there's a whole new set of requirements coming where the software you have out there can be updated, and largely CPOs will stick longer to the software they choose.
Thank you. Christian, your thoughts on Philipp's first points of view?
Yeah, happy to share some additional thoughts. I think, Philipp, thank you, super insightful. I would like to come from a slightly different angle, and that's about innovation, right? When we talk about the great things we will see soon in our industry, we talk about innovation, and I believe, therefore, probably we need both. I think it's good to have a mature fundament in regards of hardware, but we also know how long it will take to upgrade all the versions of all the different protocols and so on. So I also believe in software-driven innovations as well, which helps us to make things more agile. And in the end, if both are working together, probably that's exactly what we need to achieve to have quite mature and innovative solutions in place.
Thanks. With that, thanks for sharing both perspectives. Christian, you have the next statement, which is probably one that has a lot of debate still going on, and we saw some of it in Ryan's presentation, which is credit card payments versus proprietary charge cards. Which do you believe will drive the wider EV adoption?
Yeah, again, great question. And of course, operating a roaming platform, I'm maybe a bit biased, but again, let's focus on facts and figures. But I think in any case, I believe it's super important to give choices to EV drivers, right? Because we understood that when we started all of this years ago, most of the drivers were also believers in e-mobility, right? They were also willing to accept some challenges on customer experience. And probably we all know here in this round that sometimes you need to try twice or three times to make a charging session starting. And I believe that this is definitely not the way it will work anymore in the mass market, which we hopefully soon will reach, because then customers needs to be able to make their choice on how they want to start and stop a charging session on a charging station. And yes, of course, there will be customers who prefer to swipe a credit card or Giro card. Other customers prefer to use an app or plug and charge, or in the end, even an RFID card. And whatever else we will see in the future in the market. And I strongly believe that exactly offering them this kind of portfolio is helpful. As we all know, the more choices we need to have in place, the more complex it is also to operate this. And that's probably also one of the things we are sometimes forgetting a bit. Even if it sounds very attractive to just install a credit card reader and then all is solved, it's a bit more complex, as you all know, right? It's about finding the right partner in regards of the terminals, deciding if or if not that's already pre-installed with the charging station, or if you want to upgrade charging stations, finding payment service providers, and so on and so forth. Not going too much into the details now, but it's another possible source of failure as well, right? So it could also mean that sometimes the terminal is not working for payment, and then customers will be very happy if they have a second or third way how they can start a charging session. Also, I think Ryan mentioned this in this presentation. We see that electric vehicles are quite often being used in company fleets as well, right? There's even some regulation in place in a lot of markets on enforcing the usage or supporting the usage of EVs in company fleets. And we need to reflect on their needs as well. And probably for them, swiping credit cards is a bit more complex because then the whole reimbursement process is more complex. And in the end, I believe in the end, customers should make their decision on the best solution which fits to their needs. What we're seeing right now probably, and that's the reason why we talk about this topic that often in the industry, is that we all not super satisfied with the actual pricing levels we are reaching, right? We know sometimes under the wrong conditions, charging can be quite expensive. I believe that's exactly why we should focus more on digital solutions, because if I'm using an app or maybe even have the information in my in-car system, I know exactly ahead of time what does it cost to charge there or there. Just using a piece of plastic is exactly not solving this. So I believe also we need to think about how we can invite customers to use more available digital solutions to have a better understanding of the pricing. And as said, probably similar to other industries in these kind of pioneering times, we all are still trying to optimize and better understand business models, and therefore sometimes probably also some things are a bit overpriced. I see this mainly in Germany, so we also need to reflect a bit that this is probably a very German topic. Somehow in other markets it's still happening, but then it's not being discussed as either or. It's being accepted as a kind of situation which will be solved soon when we have more EVs in place and more charging stations. But at least from my point of view, as Hubject, we're active on global level and also active quite all around Europe. I see this kind of, let's say, fierce discussion about either or only happening in Germany. So probably that's something we also should reflect on, that maybe we need to be a bit more patient on the market development and then better see what will be adopted by EV drivers.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Philipp, do you have the same perspective? Do you come from a different perspective? And maybe I even add an extra element, because Emily asked a really interesting question. What if the future of payment will be 100% seamless? So not credit card, and then not tag, and the marketplace only to manage the energy flows, vehicle one to grid or vehicle to grid or not. So it's just like to add on to the challenge of answering back.
Yeah. I think it's a good and frequently asked question, and it's interesting because the answers are moving with the market evolvement in the end. But what Christian said already, it's about the use case. I think this is really important. We do have too high price levels in the market for a breakthrough of eMobility. We also have seen this with Ryan. But maybe number one point is the importance of public charging, first of all. I think it's roughly 40%, depending country by country. And that number, I think, is going to increase, or the importance of public charging is going to increase, because we know that the people who are now moving to EVs have less access than the ones of us who have started this a couple of years back. and have a home charging opportunity. So the simple question shows it's an important topic, and I just reconfirm it is for sure, and we need to improve on this side. Then now looking at the customers or the consumers who are now moving to e-mobility, it's very different people. It's, I guess, not people there like Christian or myself having 7, 8, 9 different apps for your energy, for your charging, for anything on your phone, but it's people who want an improved customer experience, an easier customer experience. Let's face it, the way our brain works, we don't want to change. So we are used to a gas station experience. And this is what people have in mind. It's an adaptation. It can be super convenient. Everyone knows it who drives an EV because your car is fully charged and you don't need to stop unless you do a vacation trip. So that's something to keep in mind. The consumer, which is now coming to the market, is different than the early ones. Then there's regulation and technology. I also want to talk about this briefly because Hubject is one of the promoters, or is a promoter of plug-and-charge technology. And this is also, I think, what the question was, Hugo, if I understood it correct. Plug-and-charge is the technology with the highest convenience for the EV driver because you plug in and you don't recognize the payment process is happening. So that gives, and there's a charging contract in the back, and especially combined with what Christian mentioned, fleets, that's the easiest and the most attractive solution, I truly believe, for a fleet also in the future. Now, looking at other needs, if you're the person who charges publicly not that often, there's other technologies now with the payment terminals, Christian has also mentioned, which have also advantages, and I see them, we see them coming already and increasing in terms of the share they get from the EV charging. Last topic I want to put into the discussion is the security aspects of what we are discussing here. We know that there are some security issues with some of the solutions used today. And dynamic QR codes with a display on the charger, for example, a payment terminal with a tap and pay technology, and you have a tokenized credit card payment in the back. These are examples of solutions which are, and plug and charge as well, more secure than the ones we are using largely today. So also here, we have seen a lot of change already in the market. I am sure we're going to see much more adaptation of those technologies moving ahead, and ultimately there is no, it's true, I think Christian, you mentioned it, there's no one size fit all for all. The beauty of EV charging, as an old friend keeps on saying, is the power of choice, and here I think that's also true for payment of your public charging sessions.
Thanks. Moving to the next one, still with you, Philipp, and this is one of another one's either or, so might go to a preference. But the statement that I have to you and afterwards to Christian is, do you believe that the future of EV charging relies more on the expansion of ultra-fast chargers? Or is it that the dense networks of slower chargers in various spots the actual way to make EV charging and electric mobility adoption a reality? Or at least a bigger reality according to the stats of Bloomberg, to the 40 million battery electric vehicle fleet. So which one do you, I know that both are important, but which of the dominants do you believe it's more important if you had to make a choice? Because you want to make a little bit of a controversy approach here.
Yeah, I'm seeing what you're trying to get to.
Yeah.
So number one, if you can, in any case, make sure you can charge at home and at work. Yeah, that's and it's also in terms of looking at this future development. Home and charging at the office is going to be the majority of our charging sessions. And there's huge advantages of this because largely then the person who's charging is also in control of the electricity price. And that's what we discovered already in our discussion today. This is what is needed for the breakthrough of the majority for e-mobility. So that's number one. And in public charging, now, I want to talk about the importance of having a charging solution for any business. And we all notice if we go to a hotel, the ones of us who drive an EV, not like you, Marco, but the other ones who drive an EV, then the first thing you want to make sure is there a charging opportunity? And I truly believe that for any business in the future, it's an important factor to where customers select your business over another one if you provide charging solutions. Getting back to your question, I think that any business, it doesn't matter, is it a grocery store, is it a gym, is it a restaurant, is it whatever, should have charging solutions in place. And if you don't have it, it's going to become a competitive disadvantage. And then lastly, talking about the need for more fast charging solutions, we have seen it. It is expensive. It's not going to become the cheapest way of charging your car. But it's a perception of the public that there's not enough public charging. Even as we saw with Ryan, the ratio has increased a lot already. Publicly, the perception is it is not enough. So for me, looking at the benefits from a technology side, from the car battery side, from the cost side, I personally have a preference of slower charging, and I'm not using a fast charging very often.
Christian, your point of view on this one, similar, different point of view as well?
Sure. Yeah, happy to also try to add some more perspectives. As Philipp said, I think in the end also here we need to combine the best of both worlds, right? As said, there are clearly use cases which are running much better on AC, home charging, company charging was already mentioned. And again, I believe this combination makes more sense. On the other hand, we also see in the last years that people are feeling more comfortable having at least theoretically access to fast charging infrastructure, right? That's more convenient when you go around and then you're able to use the fast charging station if you need it. I believe that's what we see. Just reflecting maybe on one topic which we haven't discussed today, but also when we believe in smart charging and bidirectional charging, where we also now see a lot of discussions happening on the regulatory side, then we need to talk again about AC charging, because we know that when I'm going to a DC charger, probably I don't want to reduce my power level for good reasons. I want to get as much as possible out of it. And therefore, I think we probably even need to think about how we can make AC chargers more attractive, because at least based on my impression right now, we see in general a lot of regulation for our industry, industry-specific regulation, as well as regulation coming from other industries. And in the end, a lot of these kind of requirements, they're also relevant for AC chargers. And that makes it probably more expensive to operate AC chargers. And then the question is, of course, is it still a valid business case? Even keeping in mind that the business case for AC and DC is, of course, different. But in the end, that's a question. Is it attractive enough still to invest into AC charging infrastructure? Or do I directly invest into a couple of charging hubs with mainly DC charging infrastructure? And I believe the more regulation we see, and as said, we already see a lot of regulation, probably the less attractive it is. And I think this is something we need to discuss, especially if you are now in Europe are focusing on more and more bidirectional and smart charging activities, where we probably see this asset more often happening at AC chargers than DC chargers.
Thanks. Picking up from the audience, I see some upvotes on some of the questions, so let's take the time for those ones. Gianpaolo asks about, AI, artificial intelligence is everywhere. There's a conversation around that. So AI could improve the user experience and payment process, especially on charger displays, and also ensure better uptime and diagnosis for critical operations. What is your quick take on this one? Is AI going to take over all of these elements of it? Is still far away? Do you see more talking than innovation actually happening in reality? Provide your perspective on this, and maybe we can get started with you, Christian, again.
Yeah, thank you, Hugo. AI is great, don't get me wrong, but frankly speaking, we don't need to have AI in place to already use the data we are collecting every day when cars are going to charging stations, right? Because even with just basic implementations of the actual industry protocols, you could already see, okay, a charging session is starting there or is not starting there. And then knowing maybe which car model the EV driver is using, I believe these kind of simplified analyses could already be used to say, dear customer, Christian, last time you went with your car to this charging station, it didn't work well. Maybe next time you should better go to this charging station because normally this is working more reliable. And I'm wondering myself why this is not yet widely happening, because the data is there, everyone is receiving a lot of information today. And I believe this is also maybe one of the reasons why we also compare ad hoc payment with charging contract, because probably the customer experience is not that much different to each other. But the reason for this is because I believe we could set up more powerful services on the contractual model by exactly using this data. So yes, AI is great and let's use it more often, but I don't think we need AI to solve at least the basic needs, providing more reliable information where customers should go to. That can include also the question, by the way, how much do I get out of this charging station, right? We know that a lot of charging stations are being flagged as 350 kilowatt or 150 kilowatt, but in reality, I'm never getting out more than 70 or 80 kilowatt. Same thing here. We know this already. Why not using this when we're telling our end customers where they should go for charging, that they can make a decision, say, yeah, that's fine for me, 80 kilowatt, that's exactly what I need. Or no, better go to the next charging station where I know for sure I'm getting out 150 or 250 kilowatt. So therefore, I think that's what we need to focus on, using more the data we already have in place. And then, of course, we can provide even better services in the future. But let's talk about the basic stuff first.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of interesting questions and comments, but you are coming to a little bit to the wrap up of the panel and also to give the break for the energize of the second half. Marco, any last question that you see from the audience that is worth picking up, or something that you feel that you are excited about to see an answer to? And also to, just to ask your take on the last question for this.
Yeah, maybe let's take that question here from Charlie, as I, let's say, like to see a former colleague here in the chat. So has any of your companies ever conducted a survey among eMobility newcomers or skeptics to determine which payment method would be the best? I always have the feeling that we talk a lot about the potential customer and not with the potential customer. What do you think, Philipp?
So indeed, we have engaged on surveys exactly on this topic. And the outcome of those surveys is that today the majority of charging and authorization happens with an RFID card on app connected with a charge contract in the background. That's for sure. And if you ask people, what you would like to have, especially the ones who are not yet on EVs, then if you show them the benefits of a seamless charging technology like plug and charge, then this is usually the technology with the highest perceived added value for a user, because it eliminates the payment process completely, and it's happening in the background.
Okay, Christian, anything to add from your end?
No, again, as I said, we are in an early phase of an industry, and that's exciting, right? So I know a lot of statistics, but they are unfortunately done by companies with interest in selling their solutions, so probably not super neutral. Again, I really like to highlight again what Philipp mentioned already. We are defining a completely new user journey, right? So we shouldn't make the mistake to compare it with fueling, because fueling runs very much differently. And therefore, probably we also need to be able to provide customers different solutions. And then in that, we will see what they will be willing to accept. But again, what we are probably doing wrong here nowadays is that we believe that they all are providing the same customer experience. And that's exactly not the case, right? Plug and charge was mentioned, but also providing information when I'm going to the next charging station. The ones who are driving EVs here, we know that our navigation systems, they are still quite limited. So why don't I see any customer ratings, for example, or why don't I see actual price information? That would be all doable. The technology is there, the data is there. I don't know why it's not happening, but that could improve enormously the customer experience. And then we can discuss in the second step, how do I pay for the charging session? Do I swipe a card or do I have a contract? But again, I think we need to really have a broader look on the customer experience than just talking about the payment process.
Thank you. Philipp, Christian, really thank you for joining and embracing the different statements and questions. If people want to reach out to you, what's the best form of communication? Will you drop your email? Do you prefer them to reach out on LinkedIn? Just a quick one before the break.
Happy to leave my email in the chat, Hugo. Yeah, and please reach out if there's questions, comments, or anything else.
Yeah. Same on my side. I said I believe we should live in a digital ecosystem, so I prefer LinkedIn, but happy to also share my email address. And also especially happy to then continue the discussion about the Durchleitungsmodell. I'm having really a personal connection to this topic. It's a great topic. It's just not solving any issue, but I think that's a bit what we are missing here. But happy to continue the conversation with the one who raised the question bilaterally.
Yeah, on David raised the question. We'll get to those ones. All right, Philipp, Christian, thank you so much. This was a pleasure.
Definitely.
Thank you guys.
So, and it's like we should not have ended that session as well as for the first one. Yeah. So I had the feeling we were rushing too fast and we couldn't stop there. So great if you follow up in the LinkedIn chat conversation, whatever else, or maybe we need to do an evening event on short notice today. We will see. But for now, we would like to go into a small break for roughly 12 to 13 minutes, not 12 minutes left. And we meet again here at 4:30 for the next up is the panel discussion. And we have 3 CEOs here talking about some questions we have. See you there. Good.
All right. I believe that we are ready to resume the Fastlane Summit. How do you feel, Marco? What has been the highlight so far?
I'm not convinced yet of buying an EV car so far, but we still have 1 more hour to go.
Well, the graph on the price parity didn't help. I'm sure of that. Maybe you have to wait for 2026 when they have those small little cars that will fit you well, probably.
Yes. But luckily, we have more people that are really convinced and adopters of the EV industry. So are the next speakers that we have here on stage. We will welcome 3 CEOs. I hope if the technic stuff will work up. So if you don't laugh, you'll cry. The fuck ups and learnings in the e-mobility industry. That's the title, and I'm very pleased to have first Kristof here. So Kristof, welcome to the round. I saw Joerg a minute ago as well. And there's Marcus. Nice. Good. And Joerg was already there.
Yeah, I saw Joerg, and then he ran away from this session, probably. He was like, this is too much for me.
Maybe he needs to re-enter the stage, but okay. Good. So let's start with the first 2 of the 3 CEOs here. Kristof from Bnewable and Marcus from the Mobility House, as far as I can read it back here correctly. So maybe Kristof and then Marcus, you can quickly introduce yourself to the audience here.
Hello, everybody. My name is Kristof Vereenooghe. I'm actually sitting in my car charging, fast charging at the same time. And I've been active in the e-mobility space from 2014 till 2020 at EVBox. And in that period, I was also the co-founder of Charge Up Europe. And I had the pleasure to work with a great number of fantastic folks, including Marcus. Happy to see you back. So over to you.
Kristof, great to see you in this setup. Really great. Yes, Marcus, I'm in the scene since 2009. I've seen all different kinds of companies, up and downs and challenges, and still with Mobility House, heading sales and communication and marketing here in Mobility House, and looking forward to discuss with you and this great audience and active audience what I have heard so far, especially on Ryan's part.
Great. Okay, so Joerg is not yet again on the stage, so maybe Joerg, you need to re-enter the call completely, and then you click on that beautiful button, join stage. But I think we can already start a little bit. Kristof, you mentioned you are currently fast charging, so how many minutes do we have left here in that session before your car is fully charged?
25, and then I'm leaving, so that should be the time. I mean, I'm just as a guest charging now. I'm no longer in the charging business. I'm in the storage and flexibility business right now. So we develop, invest, and operate batteries at industrial sites. And evaluate them through an energy management platform by doing trading and arbitrage. So, and in that way, we're still getting involved into some truck charging at depots, etc., where they need BESS operate at.
Great.
Yeah, I'm your biggest competitor, coming fast now with the first EVs, also in the storage area.
I'm not going to comment, Marcus. I'm not going to comment.
Okay, so Joerg was there and back again. Let's say he is lost again. I'm not sure.
I would say we go with the first question, maybe Marco, and then this is also about the screw ups in the industry. So these things happen, yeah. So I would say let's go with the first question to start embracing the panel, and I'm sure that Joerg is gonna stay for good. No, stay for good.
Okay, that is let's say the advantage of a live event. So maybe we're starting with the first question then, and hopefully Joerg joins then on stage again and will stay then. So Kristof, Marcus, first question, very general. How do you approach leadership in such a fast-changing industry as the EV business? Now let's start maybe with Marcus.
I think it's it varies from phase to phase within the in kind of over the last couple of years. While you had the beginning phase where everything was undefined and you had to do a lot of things, and the kind of the gaining leadership was a matter of focus. Then you had this huge growth phase starting more or less in 2018 till 2022, beginning of 2023. I think the key topic there was kind of processes, scalability, kind of getting the right people for more and more complex jobs, growing fast enough, and getting the money for it. And now, since 1.5 years, we are, as discussed before, also we are kind of in a bust cycle. Now it's about efficiency, adaptation, being flexible, cutting away where you do not make profits and money today. And one thing which kind of is a company over all phases, and a big learning for myself as an entrepreneur in that field, is the continuous focus. And it's so easy to lose focus in the phase where you don't know what is important. You try a lot of things. In the phase where you grow, you try to grow in too many things. In the phase where you bust, you're forced to. So I think these are kind of my leadership lessons out of kind of the last 15 years of eMobility.
Yeah. Well, while we see Kristof and Joerg trying to come back in, we're going to keep on going because that's the way to go in this industry. And I do have a question for you, Marcus, because the audience still has a lot of value from having you bringing in, which is it's been quite challenging up and downs on the industry. Yeah. So how do you tend to navigate setbacks without losing momentum? Because that's one of the toughest acts of balance of leadership, especially in your role.
It's a very interesting question because especially the last 1.5 years, at least for mobility, has been kind of a huge setback. Before it was continuous growth, exploding growth, where you do not really had setbacks because you always could motivate you to the future and see that it's growing and getting better. But last year with the huge shift to getting finance still done, kind of less cars sold, and certainly in all aspects of our industry, we still depend on that momentum of sold cars. We had to lay off about 50, 70 people and a couple of externals, which all helped like members of family to build Mobility House as it is. And to go to such a phase after being a kind of very grown together startup, this was a huge setback. And my key lessons there were kind of open communication. Don't mess around or think it will be better. Rather cut a little bit harder than it actually is because you don't want to do it anyhow. But if you have to do it in 2 rounds, it's even worse than just doing it in 1 round. So open communication as well internally towards colleagues, but also externally towards suppliers and customers was one main learning. Kind of fast action, do it fast. Don't fool around, don't discuss too much, because it's a lot of uncertainty, bad feelings, and it's annoying for everybody if it takes long. And then kind of start with the refocusing again fast. So what do we really do? What do we leave away? And at the end, also from a management level, don't overplay it. It's hard for everybody, and the more natural and serious you take it, the more people also go even these hard decisions with you. And I can tell you, especially if you have a great team, everybody was putting a lot of efforts in, and if you have to leave people go, this kind of really was a deep cut, also very emotional.
No, thanks for sharing, Marcus. This is a kind of conversation that sometimes you don't have, especially in this era of celebrating always every growth on social media. Maybe picking up more for you, Kristof, which, fun fact for everyone in the audience, my former boss as well, so that's always an interesting angle. So now I can ask him all the questions that I couldn't at the time. But now that looking back, what has been the biggest lesson in scaling operations? Because as Marco was saying, there was a moment there was explosive growth, and that's also hard to handle. Yeah. So what has been the biggest lesson in hindsight?
I think we, at a certain moment, we internationalized too fast and too much, instead of focusing on a couple of markets. If you look at Europe still, I mean, DACH is market number 1. France and UK are the second and the third, and then Benelux. So we went international too fast, too broad, too fast. That's definitely one thing. So secondly, going too broad and not enough focus on certain segments, on certain products. And also we underestimated the complexity of scaling up. While going in so many countries, you have to apply to all local regulatory certifications, product requirements. It's a hell of a job to get your product certified in all European countries. In each country it's different. And then at the same time also in the US, we underestimated the complexity of doing business in the US, and especially UL certification. It took us 1.5 years, 2 years before we got the first product certified. It's a nightmare because it's expensive to do business in the US, and then you're trying to get product certified locally, and when you don't have the track record, it's a tough one. So those type of things. But what helped us through at that time was a great company culture, fantastic people with the right attitude, with the right passion for the business, and with that you can do miracles. I mean, people make the difference. We had a great culture of what we created together, Hugo, EV Boxers, being EV proud, passion for contributing to the success of this business towards zero emission mobility. And that was the nice part of it. But yeah, you're an industry that is growing too fast, and now you see that we are going into a little bit of a dead valley for a couple of years. It will pick up again, but it will be a couple of years tough period. And sometimes it's good that those things happen because it sets you back. In French, they say "il faut reculer pour mieux sauter." Donc, you have to take a step back to jump better forwards. And some organizations get better out of it. And I'm sad to hear that, Marcus. I didn't know that, but the reorganization that you had. But you will come out stronger of it. I mean, and at the end, the Mobility House will succeed because it's the same. It's about a fantastic group of people, the right attitude, the passion for the business, and you guys will succeed, I'm sure.
Thank you. Believe so too. And to add one thing, which was really interesting, also how you reflected, Kristof. If I look back, we were so engaged and thought about so many possibilities. we quite often oversaw that the customers are not as fast as we are. Like this engaged and motivation, we forgot that it just takes a certain while until customers pick up certain things, until market grow to a certain extent, and kind of this understanding about the psychology and the hype cycles of customers. Kind of this is also one lesson learned. You never learn in a business school or if you do a business case, because you always overscale or take some kind of linear things, but never take into account the customer psychology of adapting to new products, new ways, and so on. That was also one very important learning for myself.
And speaking of learnings, what would you say that you understand better about leading a business, in this case your own, even a new one, versus 5 years ago, for example, when the industry was growing? What do you see that yourselves know better now than 5 years ago? You already touched on elements of those, but I'm curious to hear a little bit more about, that hindsight learning, and those kind of things.
Well, for me, I'm in a different type of business because we are no longer in the development and manufacturing of hardware. I mean, we purchase hardware, we procure them, and we have other people doing the installation but we operate them through an energy management platform. So we're still in the software and algorithm development. But I mean, if you're in the manufacturing business of hardware, it's a tough one. And so we did at the beginning and in the grow-up years, we didn't pay enough attention to unlimited testing and processes to get those products to the highest quality standards, being able to ship them all over Europe and the world. As a fast growing up, scaling company, it's something that you underestimate. I mean, so today I'm not in that situation anymore, but I'm much more process driven in the business than I used to be. That's definitely one thing. And again, focus, not too much international expansion at the same time, and actually also much more focused to get to a profitability track as fast as you can. And in the past, in the eMobility space at that moment, I mean, I'm talking 2014 till 2020, it wasn't the first priority. You wanted to grow, but profitability was not and if you can go as quick as possible to profitability, you're in a better spot for the long term, especially with the crisis that is coming along now in Germany and other countries, and interest rates and everything that is different than before.
And for you, Marcus, yeah?
Learning out of that, because we see that same hype currently being at AI than we had in the eMobility space. At the end, it's also a lot of luck. So that the key thing you can do is really, as Kristof said, creating a motivating environment, hiring the right people, and get a great movement. But then it's also luck about in which country you are, what regulation applies, and how the market picks up, what kind of investors you have. And the saying that kind of 9 out of 10 startups bust is because that certain part of luck also plays a role. And it's to a certain extent you can't influence it.
No, thanks. Marco, do you have a question on your end? Because I know that you also are eager to step in and ask something.
Sure. Maybe there's one big lesson where you say, hey, we've learned that really, maybe also from a competitor. Maybe you want to share something with us.
So for our side, it was because Mobility has the vision to realize bidirectional charging, vehicle to grid, that cars play a vital role in the energy system. So in the broader sense, batteries play a role, or flexibility plays a role. and all kinds of flexibility, being it containerized as seen behind Kristof, or being it in the EVs. But this vision and the clear, for us, the North Star, the focus, we want to achieve that, always gave us a lot of strengths and consistency in communication towards investors, towards employers, employees, and towards customers, which is at the end turned out to be part of the brand. And to have something which is so clear what you want to achieve gives a lot of motivation, but also focus. And that was always consistent and helped us a lot. And still does.
Kristof, something from you?
From my point, it's focus. I mean, there is. I mean, we had a broad product scope, and then if you see, I remember there was a show in 2016-17. There was a company with a small booth, Alpitronic, coming out with a prototype of a fast charger. And if you see how they have actually taken over that DC market with one product, DC, charging only, a modular architecture from the beginning, and how they have built out a successful story, really impressive. So really focus and do something really very well, one product line, till you reach a certain stage, is something that I remember where a competitor was better than we did.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Thanks for sharing. Let's pick up the next one here from the chat. Question for both of you. What is your view on the consolidation of the EV charging manufacturing business? And what would be your number one advice to the existing manufacturers?
It's sure that consolidation is needed. I mean, there's still too many players, and so this trend has to go on, and there is a need for certain players to consolidate and to build the route to profitability as soon as possible. Yeah.
For me, it's always a combination of hardware, software, and the sales channel. And I think we will see most probably rather more players than less players in those areas where it's not so cost incentive or expensive to invest in. Because if you look to fairs, how many Chinese products still will come to the market and will find their ways. I think the consolidation is rather happening on the software side, because there it's much easier than on the hardware side. But at the end, hardware will play less and less a role, because everything has to be connected smart, and hardware will only succeed if you have proper sales channels. You can gain and grow beyond countries or even continents. And as this is really tough to enter those sales channels, because they are very diverse, sometimes already existing out of a former business, I think the consolidation will still take a while on the hardware side. Software, it's getting more and more complex. I see that consolidation much earlier.
Thanks. A few final questions, and also from the audience, a reminder that if you have questions, take advantage of the chat to ask. And one of them is more about, you saw a lot of trends coming in. Yeah, so there was trends, some of them pan out, some of them not. What has been a trend in last 5-7 years as you've been leading the business that you believe that was going to happen, but it didn't pan out? So something that you saw, I actually believe this is going to happen, but actually in the reality, it never panned out. It never became a reality, or at least not at the scale that it was happening.
It's a good one, Joerg, to start.
Joerg, we got even if there was all the struggles, we have you here.
Well, this is basically also reflecting the issues of eMobility, right? In all the tests and trials, it went very well. We tested it like 10 times in a row, and then when it comes to the showdown, we fail. So apologies, but the system didn't let me in.
Yeah, Thanks for taking the effort until the very last minute to make it happen. We have this question for Marcus and Kristof, and afterwards you can come in terms of the question in regards to what's a trend that you believe that didn't pan out. But before we get there, I want to still give the chance for Joerg to share the initial question that we had for everyone, which is, as a CEO, how do you approach leadership in such a fast-changing industry with a lot of highs and a lot of lows? And after you take on that angle from yourself, Joerg, then you can go to the question that I had asked.
Okay, well, thanks. First of all, thanks everybody for joining us and giving us the opportunity to share some insights. I think this is a very relevant question. I'm pretty sure that both Kristof and Marcus gave their insights and would agree if I say you only can do that with a kind of crazy part of motivation, because you still need to keep your head above the waterline. You still need to have a 5 years horizon or North Star to direct the company and the team to, although you know that the road is not just bumpy, but it's uphill, downhill, left and right, bumpy obstacles on the road, unpredictable, so to say. So how do you define leadership in such a volatile market? Again, I think you need to have a very, very clear picture as leader of such a company where you want to go. Adjust accordingly if you see that there is the risk to get off track because the market is changing continuously. And again, just motivate yourself, but also your team to kind of follow that pathway, no matter how big the obstacles are, no matter how big the impact from left and right is, and how big the impact of changes is. And I mean, we went through a huge restructuring in terms of vaylens, renaming, a carve out of an integrated company system. We want to increase our footprint. So we went through everything. Marcus and Kristof went also with their teams and their companies. And I think, again, one of the drivers has to be your own motivation and a clear picture and interpretation of market dynamics to give the team some confidence. I think this is defining our daily leadership skills we have to bring up in order to move through that dynamic market. Because we all know that at the end there is a North Star, at the end there is that famous light at the end of the tunnel. We just simply don't know how long the tunnel is and what the direction is. But we know that this is a growth market. We just need to survive, so to say.
Survival it is. I had a question on the trends, but we'll get there. There was a question from the audience that I want to take, which is having so many responsibilities on your shoulder as CEOs. If possible at all, how do you keep the balance between work and life, or a life balance?
Should be an easy one, right?
Who wants to take the lead? Joerg, want to take the lead?
I'll start because I was not able to keep the balance, and I ended up with a burnout in 2021. So I was totally out, and luckily out of that I have serious lessons learned, and I manage my business as an entrepreneur today differently than before. So it is super important to keep that balance. And we went through tough times. We all did. It's so important to keep doing sport, keep being healthy and listen to your body. Work is super important and the passion for your business, but family and health comes first, and that's something that I had to pay the lesson for.
Thanks for sharing it. Joerg, Marcus, on your end, a view, if any?
Yeah, I think if I can jump in or step in, Marcus, Kristof, thank you very much for that very, very transparent insight, because I think this is also in line with what the question has been before with the motivation. There's a very, very slim line between motivating yourself every day and going the extra mile, which for sure, doubtlessly has to be our responsibility as leaders. On the other side, it is very, very hard to find the balance between the expectations of your shareholders, your investors, your owners who want to see and they have the right to see results and turnarounds and commercial success. Of course, it's a hell of investment investors and owners put into all these companies being in the eMobility section. That's on the one hand side. So there need to be quick decisions. There needs to be an extra mile. There needs to be extra effort. On the other side, you still need to, we know that this is a marathon and not a sprint, right? And one sentence I learned from Marco is, In German, it says, Gras wächst nicht schneller, wenn man daran zieht. So grass doesn't grow quicker if you pull on it, if you want to translate it like this. Things take time, and you also need to recover yourself, regenerate yourself, and re-energize yourself in order to still maintain your level of motivation and power for years rather than just a few months. And this is really, to be brutally honest, I did not yet find the right balance. Following up on what Kristof said, we are very often overpacing, right? Yeah, as I said, so far I did not find the right balance. I'm glad and lucky that I have the most understanding and supporting wife on earth for me, because she's just coping with the family and leaving me alone 78 hours per week in the office. But this is not healthy and sustainable. I agree with Kristof. This is a very slim line between commercial success and your own health and life, right?
Thanks.
Yeah, I have it much easier. I don't know. I think the key is really what kind of team you have, and if, as Kristof and as well you, Joerg, if you have the right team around you, this motivates you every day. So if you go to the office and you see each other, you share kind of the problems, but also the wins. And the successes, I think this is key. So also back to the office, you don't get motivated from at home or over screens. And second, I'm the lucky guy living in the mountains, so this is kind of my breathtaking moment. So
He's a skier.
We got the first snow now, and whenever I'm out in the mountains, and I think mountains and sea is earthing you a lot. So nature, the power of nature is earthing you a lot. So I'm therefore on the lucky side there.
Lucky you, Marcus.
Yeah.
You can have the Sauerland. And the expression, or the German expression for the Asians is you never push a noodle. So forget about the grass, never push a noodle.
As a wrap up of the session, I know there's a lot of questions in the audience, but an evolution of the question was asked by the public, which is a leader, what is more important for you personally, discipline or motivation, but maybe evolving from here, what is one word that you really value in leading businesses or leading yourself? And what will be that one word that you really defines you now as a leader, and maybe, give a bit of context, and we will wrap up the session with this. So who wants to get started? Maybe Joerg, want to kick off as a...
So the question is, what is...
one word that will define, the way you see leadership now for yourself and for the way of leading businesses. Yeah.
Passion. Basically, it comes down to passion. Otherwise, you would not survive that, let's say, crazy time of growth and market development. So yes, it's passion. It's not a definition of the size of the office, of your car, of the teams. It's passion.
For me, it's values. I mean, and the culture that you build as a company. You hire people for values. You onboard them with values. You do evaluation discussions twice a year based on values. At least that's what we do. And you work with your stakeholders, customers, suppliers, also based on values. If you have that well, I mean, that helps you drive and grow the business. And that's for me key. I mean, the values and the company culture, that's key. And that's what gives me joy. And automatically out of that, when you have the joy, the passion is following and everything.
I can totally relate to both of it, but to add something new, for me, it is kind of example and humbleness. So you have to be, on the one hand side, an example and lead a company and kind of show your values, show your passion. But on the other side, you're never as good as a team. So you also need to have that humbleness as one of the core values, and to accept that others are better, and give the freedom to others and the space to others to be better and bring their part to the company and to the growth.
Thanks. Marcus, Kristof, Joerg, thank you so much for joining us. This was quite insightful, and I'm sure everyone took quite a good takeaway. Appreciate you joining us, and I wish you a great success on your next endeavors.
Thank you. See you soon.
Thank you very
guys.
much.
Bye.
See you soon. Cheers. Bye-bye.
All the best. Bye.
See you guys. Great
All
one.
right.
Unluckily, we needed to end that session also now, even with some extra minutes. So could have talked or listened to them 1 more hour, I guess.
Yeah, I could definitely have heard about them for another hour. Quite a lot of stories, more to dig deep. Also, quite interesting insights on the mental health and the balance of leading such a business. Yeah, and leadership is lonely at the top, as I say. But hey, Marco, are you a little bit more convinced about being an EV charging, or at least taking on the business? Or how do you feel about
working in that business, because we heard a lot about passion, values, principles, a good team, and good motivation. And that's I have the big honor or the luck that I see all those values every day in working. So I'm really grateful for that.
Well, maybe the next person will bring, and the last speaker of the day, maybe will change your mind, or at least make you really excited about, at the very least, traveling the world. You saw on the program for everyone else. Soon now will join us Lexi Alford, also known as Lexi Limitless. She was already known for being the youngest person to visit every country in the world. And recently she embarked on a journey to become the first person to circumnavigate the globe in an electric car. 200-day journey.
No.
Yeah,
really?
200-day journey, 27 countries, 30,000 kilometers across 6 continents. If you talk about endurance and sustainability, this is it. Lexi, if you are here, please welcome on stage by joining the stage.
Hello there.
Hello. Welcome to the Fast Lane Summit, Lexi. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here. It's been so many interesting conversations.
Yeah, and we're going to wrap up hopefully in an inspirational, empowering for everyone. Not that everyone probably will take on an EV and travel the world, maybe, let's see. But maybe why don't you get started by sharing with us, how do you even get to think about traveling the world in an EV? What inspired you to think, yeah, this is the next thing I'm going to do. I'm going to pick up on a car on an EV, knowing nothing probably about EVs, and just travel across the world?
Well, it's a bit of a longer story, but I can give you a little more of a background on myself first. So I set off after turning 18 to backpack the world. And only 2 months into that backpacking trip, I came up with this crazy idea of traveling to every country. And that ultimately ended up taking me about 3.5 years of full-time travel. And I set a world record for the youngest person to travel to every country. I went to 196 countries by the time I turned 21 years old. And it's actually funny because I had a note in my journal that I wrote around the time that I finished that first world record that said that I had learned so much from this experience, but it was so ultimately the most challenging thing I had ever done in my life. And I didn't think that I would ever have any interest in breaking another world record. And that was until about 2 years ago when this very interesting idea came my way from Ford Motor Company. And it was actually the inspiration for traveling around the world in an EV came from another female explorer who 100 years ago became the first woman to ever drive around the world in a car. Her name was Aloha Wanderwell. And it's an absolute shame that more people don't know about her story because it's unbelievably remarkable. She traveled around the world. She started when she was only 16, traveled, tens of thousands of kilometers around the world. And she did it in a Ford Model T. And she was very ahead of her time. For me, I work on social media. I'm a content creator. I make films. So I've really documented all of my travels for many years. And this woman 100 years ago in the 1920s was in a way doing the same thing. She was creating films about this journey, touring them around the world. She was working with Ford along the way. And, very ambitious people at Ford thought to themselves, we should try to reinvent this journey, but this time with a 21st century twist. So doing it in an electric vehicle, which from what it sounds like about you, Marco, I was also quite skeptical about EVs. I honestly had never driven an EV prior to starting this world record attempt. So I was as novice as you could possibly be with exactly how the infrastructure worked, how the charging worked, what the ranges were, and it was quite the learning experience, to say the least.
Yeah, but great. But then you were following her on her steps and doing that 100 years later with the current circumstances and all the, let's say, logistics behind that and so on. I can only imagine how big that challenge was. And that is my next question. What would you say was the most challenging part of the trip?
Well, there was an abundance of challenges, as you might think.
Top 3, maybe.
Yes. As with any long around the world journey, there's going to be a lot of unpredictable things that happen. Thankfully, we had about a year to plan what the journey was going to look like, both inspired by Aloha Wanderwell's path, but also following circumnavigation world record guidelines for exactly what would be required to set a new world record. So a lot of planning went into this trip before we even, crossed the starting line. But that being said, you can always plan things in advance, but the odds of things going according to plan are quite low. So some of the challenges that came up for me personally were I experienced a lot of really intense sickness. I got food poisoning a few times. I got really sick along the journey since I was having such incredibly long days driving in so many different countries, very unpredictable access to, healthy foods. I'm not exercising the same. I'm under a lot of stress because we had to also coordinate all of the visas and permits to bring a car across so many international borders. There was a lot riding on it. But for challenges outside of my own physical health, of course, the charging infrastructure played a massive role in my daily life. I had never thought I would be so obsessed with chargers and their speeds. On the days that we did have access to fast chargers, those were the best days, definitely, but really had a lot to do with coming up with solutions for what to do when the chargers ran out, because we went to a lot of countries where there is little to no infrastructure for charging.
No, that actually brings to an interesting element, which is I saw some of the pictures that you had, and there's definitely quite an interesting set of charging locations that you had, from, I think, in Serbia with the boat, with the water bottles on the back. So this is quite innovative, to say the least. So how did you manage to charge in remote or less developed areas? There's also a question from the public, even were you able to manage an EV in Africa or certain parts of Asia where we know that the charging infrastructure is least developed? So how did you handle that, especially, potentially the range anxiety of like how many kilometers or miles you have left?
So much range anxiety along the way, especially getting into territories like you mentioned in Africa that aren't obviously known for strong infrastructure for charging. It really took a lot of workshopping and I tried a lot of different things. I tried solar panels in the middle of the desert in Chile, and that example in particular, I would 100% not recommend trying to use solar panels to charge an EV. It's incredibly slow and quite inefficient. I'm very much looking forward to if someday there will be a solution that can use solar power, because that's something that seems so obvious and people always suggest it, but the technology just isn't quite there yet. But ultimately, when there was no real charging infrastructure, I had to rely solely on domestic charging. So using household outlets to charge the car, and depending on what outlet I was able to use, and I found outlets everywhere from, a family's back garage who let me unplug their washing machine and plug in my car, like so many different crazy charging spots of figuring out where I could plug in. That can take anywhere from 30, 40 to upwards of 60 hours to get a full charge. So you end up having to wait for about 2 days to continue on. And especially on the continent of Africa is where I struggled the most, is with domestic charging, because not only when I entered Zimbabwe was there I think there was only one EV charger in the entire country, and I didn't see it. Not only is there a complete lack of charging infrastructure, but there's also the rolling load shedding blackouts. So from periodically in an unpredictable schedule throughout the day or night, they will cut the electricity. So if that happened at 2-3 o'clock in the morning and no one was around to watch the EV to make sure it was charging the whole time, you would wake up in the morning and you'll have lost all of those hours to charge. So it was definitely a struggle in some places.
Well, so by the way, there's also the question in the chat, Lexi, what was that car exactly? So it was a Ford, right? But what model, how many space did you have? Yes. How many things did you take with you, and so on? So
yes, so I was driving the entire time the new electric Ford Explorer, which is being released in Europe this year. It was basically my home away from home for the entirety of the journey.
Oh. So really a new car. And when was the trip exactly? So sorry that I asked stupid questions, but I did not read so much because I just wanted to enjoy the time here with you and asking really basic questions.
I love that. So we set off on this journey in September of 2023, and I spent about 7 months, 200 days on the road on 6 different continents, traveling over 30,000 kilometers, and ultimately started and ended my circumnavigation in Nice, in the south of France.
Oh, great.
This is one of those.
Sorry, Hugo. Do you have a playlist that you could share with us?
Yes, I actually do. I think I have a really adorable little vinyl record somewhere here. It's funny that you ask. I actually got the playlist put on a real like analog style. But there is a more modern version on Spotify, yes.
Okay, so you didn't need to play that in the car then, so.
Yeah, not that one in the car, but I spent an ungodly amount of time listening to music and podcasts and everything like that.
Yeah, cool, nice. Hugo, sorry for the intro.
No, fun fact, I was actually going to ask the exact same question, if she had kind of playlist to survive for 7 months. As probably, either you buy now a Ford or you don't want to see one again ever, because this is almost like a hate-love relationship probably. But having said this, there's a question from the audience which is interesting to explore, which is about the experience in general. And in hindsight, what have you learned during this time? And of course, the learning more from not so much as mobility, but also learning from yourself, because every new experience brings new learnings. What have you learned about yourself in the past 7 months while you're doing this trip that you see it now, becoming part of your behavior or mindset?
I definitely learned so much on this journey. And for me, I think one of the most important character building aspects is to always follow through with what you say you're going to do, regardless of, or especially when things are very challenging, because of course, thinking in seeing everything on paper, of mapping out where we're going to go, how long it should, in theory, take to complete, and saying yes to that type of experience or that challenge is an easy yes in theory, but when you're actually living it, there's going to be so many hard days where you wake up in the morning and you don't feel like you have the motivation to continue pushing forward. And I think developing a lot of discipline over like myself and my, like everyone has a natural tendency to feel a bit lazy at times. And I think always having to continue to push through that both gives you a lot more confidence in yourself and your own abilities, but it also ensures that you do genuinely, never take no for an answer, and you follow through with what you say you're going to do.
Yeah, it gives you the proof that you are capable of doing things, right? If you're working hard enough, if you really try to follow them and so on. It's great. And I think there are several uncountable, remarkable moments that you had throughout your travel and even the planning and so on, and the time afterwards. But if you now think back a little bit, is there one, you would say, unforgettable moment where you say, even when I tell people in 100 years about that is the one moment that still is in my mind?
There is a lot of really amazing moments along the way, but one of the most particularly interesting stretches of this trip was my drive across northern India into Bhutan. And if you've ever been to India and you've seen what the driving is like there, learning how to drive in such a chaotic environment was something that I'll never forget. Learning how to honk like the Indian drivers do, and facing not only the practical side of just driving there in general is a massive challenge, but unfortunately, I was driving a pre-production model of this Ford Explorer EV, and because that car is made for Europe, it wasn't compatible with the charging infrastructure in India, which meant that even though they do have infrastructure for charging, that I wasn't able to utilize it. So I was crawling across India. And not only that, but I got hit with the worst food poisoning I've ever experienced, literally throwing up at the Taj Mahal, trying to still make the most of the trip. And it was just such a struggle and a nightmare to try to find that motivation, like we talked about, to keep on going. And by the time we crossed that border, finally, to get into Bhutan, it was like stepping into an entirely different world. When people ask me what my favorite country is, I usually tell them that it's Bhutan. It's this hidden country deep in the Himalayas that most people never even heard of, let alone gotten the opportunity to experience. And I was able to continue driving through the country, which surprisingly incredible infrastructure and love for electric vehicles. The entire country of Bhutan has a goal of being not only carbon neutral, but carbon negative by 2030. So their government has completely subsidized electric vehicles and have provided EV charging infrastructure every 30 to 40 kilometers on public roads. Was not expecting that whatsoever. So that was a literal breath of fresh air on top of being in these amazing mountains. And for me, one of the moments that really stuck out the most was along the journey, I was able to meet a Buddhist nun that was living in the mountains, and having an incredible conversation with her about the importance of being present. And out of all of the times in my journey where that felt the most relevant, it felt like I was getting really that motivation to embrace the suck in a way, and to, even when, especially on the hard days, to continue to be present on it. Because in retrospect, when you look back at all of the days of your life, you don't necessarily remember the days that were the most comfortable, but you remember the days that are the hardest because they changed you. So it's really difficult to remember that when it's happening, but I think that that's something that everyone, especially in business as well, should remember, that it's all a part of the story that you're building.
Definitely.
No, thanks for sharing that. And it's interesting that you mentioned Bhutan, because it's often mentioned as the happiest country in the world, and all of those learnings come exactly from that, besides the fact that I'll never guess that Bhutan will have a charging infrastructure. So good to change the mindsets as well, especially after the travel in India. But speaking on that, there's actually a good question from Gianpaolo, which kind of is connected with this community. And you showed that you spoke to a lot of people about your travels and their sentiment about seeing an EV or about electric vehicles. So do you have any anecdotes from specific countries or communities and how they saw differently the whole adoption of EVs, or even if they knew about that, depending on where you were?
I love this question because I did see so many amazing reactions from driving this EV, especially in so many countries that aren't used to seeing something like this. And it was really interesting how many questions that people had, and it really showed how much of a global curiosity there are about electric vehicles and a lot of excitement about it, especially in places that you wouldn't necessarily expect, like Zimbabwe. There were so many people that were endlessly curious and fascinated about it. I met so many interesting people at charging stations who were early adopters in countries like Chile and Argentina, and even places more obscure like Cambodia, and people who, I actually met a man in Cambodia who had built his own EV and was driving it around. And there is so much curiosity and I think hunger for the infrastructure for electric vehicles to succeed, because ultimately that's, from my perspective, what I feel like is the biggest challenge for the industry as a whole, is just continuing to invest more and more into the charging infrastructure, which will eventually make it a much more reliable alternative to combustion.
Marco, do you have a next
Yes,
question?
I have one more. But I have the feeling that we should not even end this session here in time, like I had for all the other content today. So, Lexi, you drove an EV around the whole world, and I was not convinced until 25 minutes ago of buying an EV car. Would you swap your EV with my combustion car now?
Well, I think for me, I personally see that there's a coexistence between full combustion engine vehicles and electric vehicles. I think the diversification is really important for the people who are going to resonate a lot with EVs. Even just on a day-to-day basis, one of the reasons I love driving EVs is because it's so much more cost effective than the crazy low gas mileage that I get on, something like a bigger truck, like a Bronco, for example, that if you are adventurous like me and you do want to do cross country, like longer road trips, those things can really just cost a lot more. So I think that there is generally like a massive, payoff of the investment of getting an electric vehicle car, and eventually, depending on how much you drive, that thing could pay for itself in a way. So I think that having the choice is really important, and I think that that's something that the industry is really providing people. And there's going to be people who are always very diehard into electric vehicles, and there's going to be people who will, like potentially like you, that will never ever change their mind. So I just think that it's important to live in a world where there's a diversity of options out there.
Yeah, I'm thinking of that now. So maybe I decide this evening to switch. Maybe in terms of all your experience,
you should take more the Cambodia aspect and build your own EV. I think that's the way. That's the route.
Yeah, could be, but I'm not. But I'm not even good at building up the IKEA stuff and so on. So a little bit.
Good luck
careful.
with that.
So from all the experience that you collected all over the countries, what would you say that the EV industry should or could learn from your experience?
I think that, kind of on the note that I was mentioning before, the continued investment into the infrastructure is going to be massively important. over time, the more resilient and adaptable batteries that are going to get more and more range per charge is going to evolve naturally, but it really is that infrastructure for charging that is the most important from my personal perspective after traveling so extensively in one. And for me, I was really proud to have done a journey that highlights the the capabilities of electric vehicles. I think that being able to shift public perception and breaking this new world record is something that I do hope has done that to a certain extent, because for me, I set out on this trip to almost be a guinea pig. And, you know, in the year 2024, what is a global snapshot of the progress that electric vehicles have made, not only in places where it's, you know, thriving like the United States and in Europe and on the continent of Europe, but globally, and what is even the interest in that industry succeeding. So I hope that I've been able to contribute to that shift in perception.
Thank you for sharing that. So if someone doesn't want to wait another 100 years, maybe a woman, to follow in your steps, what would you recommend in terms of, let's say, planning such a big adventure with going by an EV, maybe twice around the world with an EV car?
One of my favorite sayings is that fortune favors the prepared mind. And I think that that's something that really translates very well to long distance EV journeys. I think that the planning is the most important part, and it really helps you avoid having those, you know, range anxiety days and, you know, having to stop and think about where you're going to be able to charge next. If you can actually map out and have a solid plan in advance, that's always that's like the name of the game for this type of travel. And I think that it's very possible. I mean, the amount of apps and websites that are being built to help like travelers like me, PlugShare is one of them, that's just incredibly extensive, and having more and more of that planning in mind, which is somewhat slightly different than obviously a normal road trip. But I think that there's a lot of potential for it, but you do have to prepare for it in a different way.
Definitely.
Yeah. So, Lexi, 2 questions to wrap up the conversation and also the event. The first one is, there's a lot of small questions about, you know, what was the itinerary? Did you sleep in a car? What were some of the countries? Where can people find everything about the experience that you've been through?
Yeah, so if you want to see the full extent of this journey, I actually just released a documentary. It's a 3-part series about every little step of the way of completing this world record attempt. And it covers all of those questions. Where did I sleep? How did I get through it? Where did I go? All of those things. You can find the answer to that in the documentary. It's called Charge Around the Globe. And if you are in Europe, in countries like Italy, France, Spain, you can watch it on Amazon Prime now. And if you are, you know, tuning in from other countries, you can also find the full series that's available for free on YouTube.
Fantastic. And one final one, which is, you have one world record as the youngest person traveling the world, or going to every single country. Then you have a second world record on circumnavigating the globe in an EV. Is there a third world record in the making, or what's next for you as a, you know, viral filmmaker, travel influencer? So what's next for you? Share with us.
Oh, well, I guess I'll never say never with a third world record attempt. But for me, and it's actually really interesting, I caught the part of your last conversation where you were talking about the balance between work and life. And that's something that I've completely thrown out of the window for myself as well, because it almost feels like I've gotten so comfortable putting myself in these really fast-paced situations and going to all of these different places and meeting so many new people and documenting the adventure and sharing it online, that one of the things that I find the most challenging now is being able to sit still and to be with myself, how to have a healthy routine at home. It almost feels like the next journey for me is within, as much as that might sound a bit cheesy, but I think that, I've been really focusing a lot on meditation and stillness, and I think that that's something that is equally important to, how you're taking care of yourself internally is just as important as how you show up in the external world. So for me, I'm focusing on that for a bit until, this next adventure starts calling my name.
Sounds good. Lexi, thanks for joining us. Really appreciate. It was really inspirational. And Marco, any final words from your end?
It was impressive. Thanks a lot for being with us here today.
Thanks,
Really
Lexi.
cool.
Thank you.
And I just read in the background chat that we had that if you need some support in the next trip, you have some volunteers already.
Yeah.
Amazing. I'll take some notes. Also, if you want to shoot me a message, reach out on social media and check out the entire journey, which is also captured there. You can find me at Lexi Limitless on Instagram and YouTube.
Sounds good. Thanks, Lexi.
All right.
Appreciate it.
Bye.
Bye. Wow, Hugo.
All right.
That was something special here in the end. So really, really exciting.
Yes. And I'm looking forward to see you building your own EV. That's essentially the landmark here, becoming an engineer.
You will be the first one to drive it then if you want.
Sign me up. Well, we are around the clock a little bit over time, but that's also because it was inspiring enough. Maybe as a final wrap up, maybe for the audience that is here, any learnings and insights you've gathered, just share on the chat. It would be really nice to hear from you. And Marco, looking in hindsight at all the 4 conversations we've had today, any highlight you have on specific one of them, any learning that you've got that you take with you, and I'd love to hear from you before we wrap up.
Yeah, so for me, it was really a great event. So again, not only to you, Hugo, but to Barb, to Rena, to all the people, to the colleagues that were involved in preparing the slots for today, in inviting the guests that we had, the speakers, to the briefing, to setting up the tool, whatever else. There's so many working hours involved or put into the event today. And I think from my point of view, it really was worth every minute that we put into it. So thanks a lot to everyone who was involved. Let's say behind the camera, if I would say so. So really, really great. And my learning is that we should have done this event even earlier. So I hope you guys can now put into the chat if we should do another one, another Fastlane Summit. I don't know, next year something. I would really, really, really be very excited in doing one more at least, or doing it on a regular base, whatever. And maybe you guys have the same feeling, or you would say, hey, let's change something for the next time. Feel free to give us feedback, whatever kind of feedback you like, put it into the chat, and we would love to hear from you. And hopefully we can meet again next time then.
Yeah. Thanks, Marco, for being a great co-host and organizing through also the technical challenges, which is also the case always. There's screw-ups, there's mismatch. It happens to everyone here. So thanks everyone again for joining. For me, it was great to see the balance of a lot of insights on the industry and then full-on inspiration, keynotes, how people go through the emotions of leading a business. And then finally, traveling around the world with Lexi is also great. It was fantastic. Thanks everyone for engaging with the questions and the audience. Marco, hopefully we'll be here for the next time in a few months. Let's see how this goes.
I will wait. I will just wait for an invitation. And there's one poll in the polls area. So there's another tab where you can easily give your reply if you want, if we should do it again or not. So Hugo, also to you again. Thanks for the, let's say, more expertise part of the moderation today. Really great to have you here.
Thank you all, and see you probably in the next event. Thanks for appreciating. Recording and insights will be shared by Vaylens in the next following days and weeks.